Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 100 of Journey into Legends. Today we'll be reading Darth Maul Shadowhunter by Michael Reeves, as well as Darth Maul Saboteur by James Luceno. Shadowhunter was released in 2001, and it follows Darth Maul on a mission shortly before the events of The Phantom Menace. I've heard some good things about this book, and I'm really interested to read a Darth Maul novel, so without further ado, let's read and review. So this book takes place right before the Phantom Menace and revolves around the impending trade embargo of Naboo. When one of Newt Gunray's deputies, Hath Monchar, goes missing with dangerous knowledge of the blockade and the Sith's involvement in it, Darth Sidious sends his apprentice Darth Maul to silence Monchar and anyone else he tells of the blockade. And from here we follow Maul to the Coruscant Underworld as he hunts down Monchar and a few other characters. And it's here where we meet who are essentially our main characters, a down-on-his-luck information broker, Lorn Pavan, and his business partner / near-sentient droid, I-Five, who Monchar plans to sell a holocron containing the blockade information to. And these characters are what makes the book work. Obviously, Maul isn't the most ideal protagonist. It's really hard to get into the mind of a Sith assassin who has practically no emotion and actually care about him. But the book frames Maul as the antagonist and introduces these really interesting and likable characters to root for. Lorn and I-Five are both very well written, and their dynamic is extremely entertaining. They also cross paths with a Jedi Padawan named Darsha Asant, which further complicates the group dynamic since Lorn has a very negative history with the Jedi. So the entire book is pretty much an extremely linear, drawn-out chase scene with Maul following Lorn, I-Five, and Darsha, and the way this book portrays Maul was a highlight for me. This is obviously very pre-TCW, so Maul's portrayal here is very faithful to Episode 1, with him playing the silent killer type, the titular Shadowhunter role, and he plays it very well. I've seen a lot of comparisons made to the Terminator, which is super accurate. It's also very similar to Anton Chigurh, a character from my all-time favorite movie, No Country for Old Men. So I think between making us care about the new characters, as well as giving us a good depiction of Maul, Michael Reeves made Darth Maul into a very terrifying and powerful villain here, making this my favorite personal version of the character even more interesting than Episode 1. One other thing that I thought was really well done and really enhanced the reading experience with this book was its depiction of the Coruscant Underworld. I think a lot of earlier books, especially pre-Phantom Menace books, didn't really capture the scale and tone of the Underworld well. Books like Young Jedi Knights, Jedi Academy, the Corellian Trilogy, and others come to mind. But this one made the Underworld feel very maze-like and claustrophobic, which really worked for the high-tension plot of the book. There's even a section of this book where the crew get ambushed in some underground tunnels by these grotesque, mutated, cannibalistic creatures called Chthons. The idea that these are mutated descendants of humans is really freaky and added to that claustrophobic, labyrinthine feeling of the Underworld. And finally, my only major nitpick with this book was its only real subplot, which involved the Jedi. It starts with Darsha Asant being sent to the Underworld to protect a Black Sun informant who ends up dying on her watch. She then reports back to the temple, and her master accompanies her back to the Underworld, where they first meet Lorn and I-Five. But after an encounter with Darth Maul, which kills her master, we then follow Darsha as her mission becomes entangled with Lorn and I-Five's. However, as all of this is happening, we then have Obi-Wan enter into the plot when he's sent to investigate the disappearance of Darsha and her master. Now, I get what they were going for with Obi-Wan almost figuring out what's happening, then getting called away at the end when Naboo gets blockaded, but the inclusion of Obi-Wan felt a bit forced, almost like Lucasfilm told Reeves he had to include Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan somewhere in this book. And although this plot does have its place in the book, I just found myself a bit bored when we would cut away from the action to another Obi-Wan chapter. Luckily, this plotline didn't overstay its welcome. After Darth Maul's fateful battle with Darsha Asant that seemingly also cost the lives of Lorn and I-Five, Maul, thinking his mission is finally complete, leaves Coruscant to rendezvous with Darth Sidious. Little does he know that Lorn and I-Five are still very much alive, and in fact, after sending I-Five away with a friend, Lorn actually follows Maul to a space station in the Coruscant system, attempting to get revenge on him for killing Darsha. And he actually comes pretty close to succeeding. However, after catching Maul by surprise and losing a hand in the process, he manages to barely escape with the holocron. Luckily, he recognizes a familiar face on the station, a senator close to the Jedi, who he gives the holocron to. Unfortunately, this senator just so happens to be Senator Palpatine, and so the book ends with Lorn waking up in a hotel room, thinking he's saved the day, gotten Maul arrested, gotten the holocron to the Jedi, but when he opens the door, Maul is there to greet him. Maul kills Lorn, and obviously the holocron is already in the hands of the Sith, the Naboo blockade goes off without a hitch, and the rest is history. This was such a creative and brutal way to end the book. Obviously, we knew how everything would end, we knew the blockade would happen, and the Jedi would never learn of the Sith's involvement, but the way it was done was so shocking, and just a great gut punch to end the book on. So overall, this ended up being such a fun book to read. The new characters were extremely interesting, and Maul was a very effective and scary antagonist. The plot was fairly straightforward and linear, but for me, that made the book even more engaging. There was no mystery to unpack or network of subplots to navigate through. This was just a simple cat and mouse chase that I found very entertaining. Alright, so I just finished Darth Maul's Saboteur by James Luceno, and this one was certainly weaker than Shadowhunter. Taking place before the novel, as well as the Darth Maul comics, this one brings Maul to the planet Dorvala, where mining barges are being mysteriously sabotaged. The whole story is about Maul manipulating this and the different mining companies to suit his master's purposes. The problem? These purposes aren't really fleshed out very well. Basically, the story ends with a few rival mining companies merging and choosing the Trade Federation as the distributor for their ore, which I guess Sidious wanted. Why, we don't really know. I guess it's just a part of his larger plan. Anyways, the story was fine, it was entertaining, but I just didn't care for any of the characters, even Maul, whose characterization I thought was significantly weaker than in Shadowhunter, probably because that's just a full-length novel, but also because I just prefer how Reeves writes the character. Again, plot-wise, this felt pretty unnecessary. I don't really understand its significance, but I guess it's cool to just get another story about one of Maul's missions and how many little things Sidious had to manipulate to put his plan into motion. There were a few fun pieces of continuity in here. Tarkin briefly appears in this, which was very surprising. This story also leads right into the Darth Maul comics, with Sidious mentioning Black Sun. And finally, Half Monchar from Shadowhunter appears here, still alive and well since this takes place before the novel, so that was neat. Anyways, overall, this was a decent read, but nothing too special. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video, where I'll be reading the Jedi vs. Sith comics written by Darko Macon. See ya.